Well, good evening, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. This is going to be a meeting about an enforcement case against Edward C. Levy. Just wanted to let folks know we're just kind of dilly-dallying a little bit here, make sure we get everybody in the room. But letting you know that this is actually the second informational session that we've had on this project. So if you're looking to see what happened at the last meeting, that is available on our YouTube channel. We'll share that out later on today. And then tonight we're going to be doing an info session and then the public hearing as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I wanted folks just to know that this is actually the second meeting that we're having about this proposed action. So a little bit of housekeeping information. Your lines will be muted during the meeting tonight. We will have a chance for question and answer and comment where we can unmute you, but during the presentation part, you will be muted. We're recording this. So like I mentioned a second ago, the first meeting that we had a couple weeks ago was recorded and is already posted on YouTube. We will be doing that for this one as well, but we might not get the recording out until Monday. So I just wanted people to know if you want more information about this project, you can always go back and listen to that other recording. So how are we going to do things tonight? Tonight, we are going to have an official hearing to take comments on the record. So what we want to do, first of all, is just introduce you to our staff, hear a little bit more about the action from a couple of our staff members. So we're going to do a little bit of an informational session. We'll have a question and answer period after that, where if folks have questions for us, we're happy to have some dialogue and answer those questions for you if we can. And then once that question and answer part of the evening is over, we're going to be getting into the public hearing portion. And during the public hearing portion, we will be taking comments on the record, but if folks still have questions, we won't be responding to those questions that are made as a comment, at least not at this time. So want to kind of just parse out that there's a couple of different parts of the night tonight, and we'll go over that again, but I just like to lay the groundwork in case people already have questions that they want to ask. We're happy to answer those. So a couple ways you can ask questions. You can use the question and answer box. We're happy to have you type those questions in while we're talking today, anytime during the meeting, you can go ahead and do that. You can click that raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. That will raise your hand so that you can ask your question verbally if you want to. And I don't see anybody calling in, but if we do get folks calling in, I'll just remind them how they can use their phone to raise their hand as well so that we can unmute their lines and they can ask their questions or make their comments depending on what part of the evening we're in. Okay. So housekeeping stuff out of the way, want to talk really briefly through the agenda, but the first thing I want to do is introduce our air quality division staff for you. So first I should introduce myself. I always forget to do this and I don't know why, but I'm Jennifer Dixon and I work in our air quality division. The first person I want to introduce you to besides myself tonight is Chris Etheridge, and Chris is one of our assistant division directors here in the air quality division, and he's also the decision maker for this action. So I know he wants to say hello to everybody, welcome you all to the meeting. So Chris, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take the floor here.
Thanks, Jen, and good evening, everyone. As Jen mentioned, I am the decision maker for the hearing tonight and assistant division director for the air quality division. So just wanted to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to participate tonight. We appreciate and value your comments and any concerns that you have with the item before us tonight. So thank you for being here and look forward to discussing more on this.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. You'll see Chris a little bit more towards the end of the evening when we get into the hearing portion. So he will be listening throughout the whole meeting and obviously throughout the hearing and making note of any concerns, questions, things like that that folks have. So I want to introduce the rest of my staff. So if Aaron and Katie, if you guys could turn your cameras on just for a second, and you're going to be mostly hearing from these two a little bit later on. So Aaron Moran is our enforcement specialist on this case, and then Katie Koster is our inspector for the facilities in the Detroit office. So you're going to be hearing a little bit more from both of them during the informational session in just a minute, but there's one other person online that I want to make sure that I introduce, and that's Caitlin DeVries. Caitlin is essential in helping us run these Zoom meetings. So Caitlin, thank you very much for helping us out on the back end there. Erin, if you want to leave your camera on, and then Katie, if you want to take a break for a second, I'll just run through this agenda and then I'm going to pass the presentation over to Erin. So like I mentioned, we're going to be doing an informational session. You'll hear a little bit more from Erin, a little bit more from Katie about the enforcement process. How did we get here tonight? What this enforcement case actually entails. A little bit of how Katie does with her inspection duties and some of the other things that might come out of this enforcement action that we think might be helpful for you to know. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll get to that question and answer where we will take your questions and try to answer as many of them as we can until about 7 o'clock or whenever you're done with questions, whatever comes sooner. Once we get past that point, we'll shift into that official comment period and we'll open up that hearing. There's a statement that I have to read, and then we'll take any comments that folks might have on the record. After the hearing portion, we will talk a little bit about where you can find more information. Sometimes folks come into these meetings and they find that they really want to know more, or maybe they don't know as much as they would have liked to before they make a comment. So we'll let you know where you can find more information. We'll let you know who you can contact with further questions, and then we'll obviously talk to you about how you can submit an official comment. So there's different ways that you can do that, and you don't have to do it tonight if you don't want to. So we always want to mention that to people as well. So that being said, I'm going to pass this over to Erin. Erin, if you want to take it away, you should have control of the slides at your fingertips, but let me know if you have any issues.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, and just again, for me, thanks everyone for joining tonight to learn a bit more about this enforcement action with Levy. So to start out, I'm just going to give a quick overview of the Air Quality Division, and then Katie and I will talk about Levy's violations, the enforcement process, and then the proposed consent order that we currently have out for public comment. So the Air Quality Division, or AQD, regulates sources of air pollutants to protect human health and the environment by enforcing health-based rules and regulations. So we specifically regulate stationary industrial sources, which we also call regulated facilities. So facility is the word you'll probably hear us use when we're talking about like a company or place that creates air pollution emissions. So the AQD has many different roles in regulating air quality. One of our primary roles is to conduct inspections of regulated facilities to make sure that they're following the air quality and health-based rules and regulations during their operations. So this enforcement action covers violations at 2 different Levy facilities that, although one is in Dearborn or has a Dearborn address and one has a Detroit address, they are less than a mile apart. So this picture that I currently have on the screen is kind of a further out view of where Levy is located, just in case you're not so familiar with the area. You can see Zug Island there on the right side of the picture, and the Detroit River to the east, as well as where I-94 and I-75 are located around the facility. And then the second picture that just popped up here, this just zooms us in a bit more for a closer view of the facility so you can see the different locations. So both Levy facilities operate on Cleveland Cliffs property. Cleveland Cliffs is a company that makes iron and steel. So the Plant 6 facility, which is on Mellon Street, that is the Plant 6 facility is in the bottom left circle here on the map. So Plant 6 handles slag that is formed while Cleveland Cliffs makes steel. So it was at this facility, Plant 6, where we cited the 21 days of fallout violations that are included in the consent order. The other facility is called the Section 2 facility. It's located near the intersection of Dix and Miller Roads, and it's the top right oval here in the picture. This facility handles slag that is formed while Cleveland Cliffs makes iron. So this is the facility where we cited the 7 days of odor violations that are included in this consent order. We're going to talk more about these violations a bit later in the presentation, but first I'm going to turn it over to Katie to talk about Levy's processes.
Hi, good evening. I'm going to start off with a brief overview of Levy operations. As Aaron mentioned, Levy Company handles slag that's produced by Cleveland Cliffs. And there are essentially two main types of slag, iron slag and steel slag. The process for handling both types is generally the same, although there are some differences which we will point out during this presentation. And again, as Aaron mentioned, the Section 2 facility handles iron slag and the Plant 6 facility handles steel slag. So when slag is formed, it floats on top of the metal and is collected in a pot. Levy Company moves the slag pots to pits where the molten slag is slowly dumped out. Once the pit is full, the slag is air and water cooled for a period of time. After saturating with water, Levy digs out the slag from pits and stockpiles it. Further watering occurs on the stockpile until it's either loaded in trucks at the Section 2 site or is screened at different sizes on Mellon Street at Plant 6. At Plant 6, the empty slag pot is knocked against a hard surface to dislodge any material that has solidified. This is known as a skull. And this happens in a partial enclosure. So it's the red building pictured right above the process photos box. And then at the Section 2 operations, an odor control chemical is added to the water sprays because the iron slag contains more sulfur than the steel slag. So to set the context for this enforcement action, let's go over Levy's air quality violations. So first, the state of Michigan has a rule. Some of you may be familiar with it, Rule 901B. This rule states that a company shall not have air emissions that cause unreasonable interference with the comfortable enjoyment of life and property. So this rule covers both odors and fallout. Just a note here, I'm going to be using the word fallout, but fallout includes any fugitive dust or debris leaving a facility's property lines. So the violations we cited at Levy were all for alleged violations of Rule 901B, and they were all the result of air quality staff investigations that were in response to citizen complaints. So investigations of the fallout complaints included collecting samples and sending them to a lab for analysis. And these investigations led us to allege that the fallout was coming from the Plant 6 facility. An investigation of odor complaints, including spending time up and downwind of the facility, evaluating the intensity, duration, and frequency of the odors, led us to allege that odors were coming from the Section 2 facility. And due to the continued noncompliance we were seeing with Rule 901B over time for both of these facilities, the violations were referred to escalated enforcement.
All right, so back to me. I am now going to give an overview of the enforcement process. So this slide here is more of like a visual overview of the different steps that we take before we issue a consent order. So the process starts with an inspection of a facility. This can include a physical inspection where an inspector is checking the facility's operations to make sure that they are operating both according to their permit and also according to any state and federal air quality regulations that apply to the facility. We also inspect facilities in response to complaints for issues such as like odors, fallout, and fugitive dust. So during these inspections, we conduct investigations like the way Katie explained. So during these inspections, we may find violations. If we find a violation, we then send what's called a violation notice. And this notice kind of just lets the company know that officially that we found some violations at your facility. You need to let us know how you're going to correct those and also like the time frame you're going to correct those in. So when we send these violation notices, the company has time to respond and also that time to be able to correct the violations. So in the case with Levy, we inspected and found violations due to receiving the odor and fallout complaints from the community members. So in this process, after a period of time, if violations are not being resolved if they're recurring or if they are in a category of violations that are required to be sent to enforcement, then the district staff sends what's called an enforcement referral to the enforcement unit. So that's where I work. After we receive this referral, we then send out an enforcement notice. So an enforcement notice lets the company know they will have to resolve their violations through a legal process. This is usually through a document called a consent order, which I'm going to describe in a bit. It also requests an initial meeting with the company. So we have an initial meeting with the company, and we have discussions about what their plan is going to be to resolve the violations. So it might be one meeting, it might be multiple meetings where we're having these discussions. So during this time period is when we are coming up with a compliance plan that the company will have to follow to resolve their violations. So once we come into an agreement with a company about what the compliance plan will be, we then put the consent order out for a 30-day public notice and comment period. And that's where we are now. So anyone can submit comments about the proposed consent order to us that we will take into consideration before we finalize the consent order. So after the public notice and comment period is over, the AQD will then address all substantive comments that we receive. And if there is demand from the public on an item in the consent order that AQD is able to change, we may go back to the company and propose changes to the consent order. If there aren't any changes, or if we agree with the company on the changes, we then move forward and both the company and AQD will sign the consent order. And it is at this point where the consent order is considered what's called effective, and the company is legally required to follow what is in the consent order. Okay, so a bit more about the enforcement process. Escalated enforcement, what does that mean? Escalated enforcement is the legal process which we use to resolve air quality violations that were cited and sent to enforcement. The end result of the enforcement process is usually an administrative consent order. This is a legally binding contract between AQD and a company. Most violations that are escalated to enforcement are resolved through a consent order. So the consent order is an administrative settlement. We are legally required to offer a settlement to every company that comes through escalated enforcement before we consider possibly sending the enforcement case to the Department of Attorney General or to the Environmental Protection Agency. So a consent order always contains a compliance plan, payment of a monetary fine, and what are called stipulated fines in the case that there are violations of the consent order. I went too far. Okay. So a bit more about the enforcement case with Levy. A lot has happened in this case over a long period of time, so I wanted to give a visual overview of the timeline for this enforcement action. So the timeline starts in September of 2018, which is when we cited the earliest violations that we're resolving in the consent order. And then the timeline goes until October 2024, which is when the public notice and comment period for this proposed enforcement action will end. So you can see on the timeline that the length of the time period we cited for the odor violations is pretty different from the time period we cited for the fallout violations. So as I said, the earliest violations we cited were fallout violations from Plant 6 that occurred in September 2018. So between September 2018 and May 2024 is when we cited those 21 days of fallout violations. So this time period is represented by the light blue box here with a dashed outline. And then the time period in which we cited odor violations from the Section 2 facility is much shorter. It lasted from November of 2019 to September of 2021. And that time period is shown by this smaller light gray box with a dotted outline. Then in the middle of the timeline, there's these two circles that show when we sent the enforcement notices to the two facilities. So the circle on the left shows that we sent an enforcement notice to Levy for their odor violations of the Section 2 facility. in March of 2022. So then after a period of about 6 months, in September of 2022, we decided to also escalate the fallout violations from the Plant 6 facility. And so at that point, we sent another enforcement notice to Levy for the violations at Plant 6, and that's shown on the circle on the right. And then on the right side of the timeline, there are 2 circles that show the informational session that we held on October 1st, as well as today's public hearing. And then there's also the darker gray box, which represents the public notice and comment period, which we opened on September 9th and will last until the end of the day on October 25th. So you can also see that there is a gap between when we sent the enforcement notices and the public notice and comment period. This kind of shows how long it can sometimes take to reach a resolution with a company and enforcement. A lot of enforcement cases do move more quickly, but as you can see, some cases can take quite a while to reach a resolution with the company. Right, so next up, I have a summary of what is written in the proposed consent order for Levy. So the consent order identifies the alleged violations that will be resolved. In this case, those were the Rule 901B odor and fallout violations. It also has a compliance plan that Levy will be required to follow, which we'll go over in the next few slides. And then also includes a monetary fine. So in this settlement, the total amount that Levy will be paying adds up to $388,703. And as in every enforcement case, a portion of this is required to go to the State of Michigan General Fund. This amount is $33,750. And so the rest of what Levy will be paying, that's the $354,953, will go to a supplemental environmental project that Levy is proposing to do as part of the enforcement action. Lastly, the consent order also includes stipulated fines that Levy may have to pay in case that we find violations of the consent order after it is signed. So in the next few slides, Katie and I are going to give a summary of Levy's proposed compliance plan. So overall, they will be required to comply with Rule 901. So they should not cause odors or fallout that cause unreasonable interference with comfortable enjoyment of life and property. That is the language from that rule. They also will be required to comply with both a fugitive dust control plan and a nuisance minimization plan for odors, both of which AQD has reviewed and approved before we posted this for public notice and comment. So now I'm going to hand the slides to Katie so she can tell you a bit more about these 2 plans.
All right, so let's start with the fugitive dust control plan. This applies to Plant 6, again, operations along Mellon Street and near Mellon and Schaefer Roads. It's a document that describes what actions the facility must take to minimize fugitive dust that could cause fallout in the surrounding areas. So the plan incorporates existing requirements that are already in the permit, but now through this order, the requirements will have an associated fine or penalty for non-compliance. And the plan also contains enhanced and new requirements that were identified and agreed upon as part of this action. So, all right, so what are they? In general, the requirements include the operation of additional water sprays and misters in different locations of the process to further control dust. The company is prohibited from certain activities unless they occur within the partial enclosure that you see pictured, again, the red building in the middle of the slide there. The property must be regraded to minimize standing water around areas of hot slag, because hot slag on top of water can cause a cloud of steam and dust particles. And there's a required operational change on how a specific slag known as castor slag is being handled. So the next question is, how are we going to ensure that the company is following all of these components of the plan? So first, Levy is required to inspect the controls every day and document that they're working properly. They must conduct employee training on a yearly basis to make sure everyone's on board with all of the requirements of the consent order. They have to conduct maintenance on equipment quarterly to try to prevent breakdowns, but also have spare parts on hand, in case there's an issue, they're able to remedy it fairly quickly. All of these actions are required to be documented, along with any issues that are found or corrective actions taken. And on top of that, a quarterly report must be submitted to the Air Quality Division if any of the terms of the plan are not met. We will also conduct inspections and evaluate compliance with the plans during our routine inspection process. And just to note, for this plan and the other one, we have reviewed and approved them in order to generate draft documents, but they are, again, in draft form, and so they are also open to comment from the public. All right, switching gears to the other plan, which is the draft nuisance minimization plan for odors. This plan applies to Section 2 of the facility. So sorry to be redundant, but again, these are the iron slag pits operating near Miller and Dix Road. It's going to be a similar type document, outlines what actions the facility must take in order to minimize odors. So this plan also incorporates existing requirements that are already in the permit, but now these requirements will have an associated fine if they're not followed, as well as enhanced and new requirements that were identified as part of this action. So in general, the requirements in this plan are to continue to thoroughly water the iron slag and use odor control. Because as I mentioned earlier, the iron slag has a higher sulfur content than the steel slag, hence the need for odor control. And then the company needs to, or has to, ensure the odor control system is operated and maintained properly. So what this means in the plan is that they're required to add the maximum amount of odor control chemical each day. And they have to inspect the odorant system daily and ensure all the components are working, such as the tanks, mixers, pumps, and keep an extra supply of odorant on hand. So we're going to ensure compliance with this plan in the same way as the prior one. It includes a requirement to conduct daily inspections and document that the system's working properly, and also conduct a daily on-site odor survey for anything abnormal. Levy must train the employees yearly on the requirements of the order so that everyone is fully aware of what needs to be done. They must conduct regular maintenance, so the necessary equipment for the water and odorant system is working properly, and again, have spare parts in case there's an issue so that they can quickly address any equipment issues. Again, all these actions are required to be documented, and a quarterly report must be submitted to the Air Quality Division if any of the terms are not met. And again, the Air Quality Division will also conduct inspections and evaluate compliance with the plans during the inspection process.
All right, well, this is the last part of our presentation, and this is about Levy's proposed supplemental environmental project. So a supplemental environmental project, or a SEP, for a shorter word, is an environmental or public health project that a company volunteers to do as part of a consent order. The project must go above and beyond what the law requires, and also must provide added benefits to the community or the environment affected by the violations. It's important for us to know that AQD is not allowed to require a company to do a SEP, and also cannot direct a company to do any certain SEP. So Levy's proposed SEP is a haul truck replacement project. So right now they are using a haul truck from 1965 at the Plant 6 facility. As you can probably imagine, the emission standards in 1965 were not as strict as they are today, and so this truck emits quite a bit of pollution. Levy is proposing to replace the 1965 truck with a new haul truck that was built in 2024. So as you can probably also imagine, technology has come a long way since 1965, and truck emission standards are also more strict. So compared to the 1965 truck, the 2024 truck will produce 99% less nitrogen oxide, particulate matter, and total hydrocarbon emissions. As part of the project, we are also requiring Levy to scrap the old 1965 truck, so it will be taken apart and will no longer be able to be used. The total cost of this project will be at minimum that $353,953 that I had in a previous slide. There's also a timeline as part of this project that Levy will have to follow. So they will need to purchase the truck within 30 days of when this consent order is signed. The truck must be delivered and in service within 16 months of when the consent order is signed. So that might sound like kind of a long period of time, but I do believe it is being delivered from overseas. And then also the existing truck from 1965 is required to be scrapped no later than 30 days after the new truck is in service. So if you are interested in reading more about this project, or you want more detail, you can check out the enforcement summary report and proposed consent order. It's posted on our website, and I'm guessing Caitlin probably also put that link in the chat. So the SEP proposal is part of Levy's consent order that is posted. So that is the end of our informational presentation, and I'm going to hand it back over to Jen so we can start the question and answer session.
All right, thanks, Erin. Thanks, Katie. So right now we just have one question in the question box, but we'll answer that one. And then if folks have other ones, feel free to put them in there. Raise your hand. I'm just going to check really quick to see. Nope, we don't have anybody calling in. So I wanted to make sure that we didn't have any folks calling in that might need to use the phone. So the question was going back to one of the first slides that you talked about, Erin, and it was just about the addresses and where the facilities are located. So it just said that it looked like they are in Dearborn, not Detroit. And I think that goes back to just mailing address, but I don't know if you can just reiterate that again really quick while we.
Yeah. This might be a better question for Katie just because she's much more familiar.
Oh,
with
that's
the
true.
area.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it is due to the mailing address. So
Yeah, just to elaborate on that, the Plant 6 operations for the steel slag happen at 2 different places. So on the map, we were trying to circle the slag pits and that red building I was referring to that is the partial enclosure. Those are within the Cleveland Cliffs steel mill complex. And so I think that's considered Dearborn. But then the material is actually conveyed across the river to Mellon Street, and screening happens to size sort the slag along Mellon Street. And I think the Mellon Street portion actually has a Detroit address, where
Okay.
Cliffs has a Dearborn address.
Yeah, it's a little bit convoluted
Mm-hmm.
how the process works over there and then having the two sites for sure. So yeah, thanks for talking through that a little bit more. I know Caitlin just put a note in the chat to put questions in the question and answer box. But again, if you do want to ask your question verbally, we're happy to unmute your line so you can do that. It's not a problem at all. Yeah, that's a really great question. So the question goes to the water spray that's involved, especially in the fugitive dust plan that's required. And how is that impacted by temperatures below freezing? You know, what's been your experience with things like that, Katie?
My experience is they've had minimal issues with freezing. And again, they've got the daily log showing that the sprays are operating in the various locations. And part of that spray system has already been in place and operated over the years. And we really haven't seen issues where we're seeing non-compliance with that and having to cite because they weren't spraying.
Okay. I know we've definitely had some days over the past few years where we've had the polar vortexes and it's gotten really, really cold. And do they still operate on those days? Do you know?
Yep,
Yeah, so
it's
all the time. So
all
they're,
the time.
yeah, working through those. And we'll talk about this a little bit later as well, but you know, Aaron and Katie talked about this in the beginning, that these enforcement actions came out of citizen complaints. So this came out of our direct inspections and compliance related activities to citizen complaints. Katie does regular inspections of these facilities too. But when residents are seeing things that rise to the occasion, we definitely want you to reach out and let us know. So the same goes once this enforcement action gets through the public comment period and we review all the comments that we receive, and there is a final action that Chris makes on this. If there are issues that residents are seeing, please reach out and we'll give you that information too. I think, you know, a lot of people have that, community groups definitely have reached out as well, but we're going to share that again in a little bit here. And, you know, Katie's more than willing to either go out, and we also have other staff out of our Detroit district office that are responsive to complaints over there as well. So yeah, it's a great question, and you never know what might come up. Even though our Detroit district office folks are close, they aren't right in that neighborhood all the time. And so we really do rely on residents to let us know when things are going on that shouldn't be going on. So appreciative of folks that have called in the past for sure. Yeah, so this is an interesting question too. And Katie, you might know the answer to this. So this goes a little bit to the haul truck and how the slag is hauled away from the facilities. So this haul truck is an on-site haul truck from what I understand, but I could be misremembering that. I'll have you talk about that a little bit as well. But the question was, is there anything that you know of that goes out slag related by rail or by ship?
To my knowledge, it's all taken off the facility by truck. Both facilities, section 2 and plant 6.
So this new haul truck that or the haul truck that they're replacing, is that one that's used on road hauling, or is that an on-site haul truck?
On site, I believe.
Okay.
I believe that's correct.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just didn't want to misspeak and I said it out loud. So I wanted to make sure you guys were going to verify that for sure. So yeah, appreciate the questions. Okay, yeah, that's great. So the Springdale Woodmere Block Club is listening in as a group, it sounds like, so that's awesome. And they have members that have questions, so it's up to you all. If you want to unmute your line and you can ask, we can try to see if we can hear, you know, through how you're listening. Or if you want to type the questions into the chat, that's great as well. I can try to unmute you. Usually, let's just see what, there we go. Let's see if we can get this to work. Okay.
Hello?
Okay, yes, we can definitely hear you. If you don't mind, just, I'm not sure how many folks you have. You said many folks with questions. Are you guys like lined up, or what's the best way to get the questions from all of you?
Yeah, we have around 10 members. Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine. No worries.
So we have around 10 members that have questions.
Okay,
Our block club president is lining them up
Okay.
to ask questions.
yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, let me tell her, is she ready?
So who wants to take the first question? Okay, I'm gonna do two. Okay. You can
We-
combine them in one.
Yep, our first member is coming up.
Okay, wonderful.
Hi, how are you?
Great. How are you? We can hear you pretty well. So go ahead with your question whenever you're ready.
Okay, so my question is, are the new trucks really a punishment, seeing that they had to get two trucks used as the green circle cement anyways? So seeing that they were already gonna have to do that, I don't see how it's a punishment for them.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So I'm gonna have Aaron just talk a little bit more about how the SET process works, because this truck was a specific truck to replace one old truck. So I understand what you're saying for sure. But the supplemental environmental project that this truck replacement is done through has some specific requirements that they have to meet. And then just as a reminder, it's voluntary for them to enter into these. And so we have to take their proposals kind of as they come, which I know is a little odd. But Erin, I'm going to let you talk a little bit more about that and see if we can answer this question a little bit better.
Sure, yeah, so what we're required to, I guess, do as part of our settlement with any company enforcement, including Levy, is to reach an agreement with the consent order and the penalty. And so that is kind of the basis of what is a consent order. A supplemental environmental project is extra. So this is something, like I said, that a company will volunteer to do as part of a consent order. They're not required to do that. So the haul truck project is something that Levy chose as their project. So this is something that, goes above and beyond what they're required to do. They weren't required to do any haul truck replacements as part of the requirements of the consent order. The consent order is directed towards the violations that are being resolved in the consent order. So that was like the odor and fallout. I'm not aware of, I think, the requirement for replacing trucks that you mentioned, but I think that's definitely something I would look into. I don't know if I heard you correctly on when you were speaking, but if you wouldn't mind like typing that into the chat or just repeating what you said so I can write that down, I'd be interested in looking into that.
Okay, so you said it wasn't a requirement. So what is the requirement? Can you clarify? Because I didn't understand that as well. Since the trucks is not a requirement, that's something they're doing voluntary. So what is the requirement that they were given?
So the requirements that they are given are to comply with the rule 901B that we talked about. So that is don't cause odors or fallout that are going to affect people and the community around the facility, and then also to comply with their fugitive dust control plan and their nuisance minimization plan for odors. So those requirements are really targeted at the violations that we are looking at in the consent order.
So in this
Okay.
case, just to maybe to add a little bit more that might be helpful. So in this case, if you remember back to the amount of money that Erin talked about, it was $100,000. So in this case, the company could have just paid all of that money into what we call the general fund, which doesn't help the community at all. It doesn't reduce emissions. It doesn't do anything. It just goes into the state of Michigan fund. So instead for this, they volunteer to do this replacement, which of course, yes, it's benefiting them. But having the new truck also does reduce the emissions that would normally be there of pollutants that come out of using an old vehicle that's not up to today's standards. So typically when a company wants to do a supplemental environmental project, even though we don't get to tell them what kind of project to do, they do have to meet a part of having emissions reductions, having it be environmentally beneficial or public health beneficial. And so in this case, because the truck's emissions will be so much lower, 99% lower than the old truck, it will benefit the community just by reducing those emissions. So it's a little bit different. So instead of paying that big chunk of money just into a fund that doesn't go back to the community, they are doing this project that will replace the truck that will ultimately reduce pollutants going into the community. So I'm not sure if that helps or not, but definitely ask if you have a clarifying question on that one.
I understand. Now, just to follow up, seeing that they did that voluntarily and in the purpose to help the community, is there a way where the community can be shown the receipt from when they scrapped the truck and maybe the money donated to the community project?
Yeah, Erin, if you want to talk about how that works, because some of it I think might already be in the paperwork, but if it's not,
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the project proposal is in the consent order itself. So that's where you can read the description of the project and what they're required to do as part of like the budget and the record
The
keeping.
truck, yeah, all
Um,
that stuff.
Yeah, but part of what they're required to do is send us documentation that they actually, you know, purchased the truck was delivered, and that they've started the truck up. So that is something that they send to us, and we definitely make sure that those steps are completed and completed correctly. As for sharing that with the community, I think it usually depends on the case. I don't know, Jim, maybe you can help me out. Sometimes with very high profile cases, we have our own websites where we post things.
Yeah,
I'm-
this one, we could definitely share it once it's done. I mean, there's specific timelines the company has to meet, so there isn't this, you know, we're gonna someday get a truck. It's like, no, you have to get a truck in this time period. You have to get rid of the old truck in this time period. So we'll have all of that paperwork. We may have to use the Freedom of Information Act to deliver that to the community, but even if the block club requested that information, we could get it. It's just not, right now, the way our program is set up, we don't have an easy way to just share that out with people on the internet. So we're working on that. It might be ready in time for this. We're hoping. We have that new system. We're working on it. But yeah, once those timeframes kind of get kicked out and enacted, if anybody from the block club wants to reach out to Katie or Aaron or myself, you know, we'll figure out a way to get you that information. But yeah, they have deadlines, they have timelines, they have to meet them. If they don't meet them, they could be subject to other, you know, steps to take. And the main thing is, you know, what Aaron talked about is if they violate the consent order, they have to pay more fines. I mean, if they violate any of the things in the consent order, they could have to pay more fines. So even the plans that Katie talked in detail about, you know, that's really kind of the meat of this project, is making sure that the company is following those plans so that the community isn't experiencing fallout and isn't experiencing odors from these facilities. So hopefully that's helpful, but I'm not sure if you have a follow-up or if somebody else wants to ask a question.
Just to end, I do have one last follow-up.
Yeah, sure.
Seeing that 2 of the trucks are gonna be better for the environment. How many, and if an estimate, more trucks that are still contaminating the environment do they have?
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure how many haul trucks they have. This is a kind of a specific one, I think, but Katie, I'm not sure if we'd be able to find that out or not, but
We could probably find it out, but I don't want to guess off the top of my head,
yeah.
'cause I don't know.
Yep, that's something that we could follow up
Yeah.
with you guys. If somebody from the block club wants to even put an email address where we can contact you guys in the question and answer box, that would be great, just so that we have it. I don't know what email you guys registered for the meeting with, but if you used one that we can get a hold of folks, we can share that out too, for sure.
Yeah, just because I understand that this is gonna help, you know, but that's not gonna solve the problem. The problem is still gonna be there. But we just want to get the information. I do thank you for your time. That was
Yeah.
all the questions I had.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I don't know if do you have someone else who has a question there?
Yep.
Sure, go ahead.
Second member is coming up now.
Okay.
Hey, good evening. Thank you for allowing this meeting. So my name is Lisa Rodriguez. I'm the Vice President of the Springdale Woodbury Block Club, and I'm going to follow up on that young lady's question. So knowing that Levy has several companies that are under different names for their trucks, it's going to take quite a bit of searching to understand all the many levels of Levy, Cadillac Asphalt, and all the other subdivisions of trucking companies. So that's going to take a lot of time to do that. But we are interested in that bottom line number of how many trucks they have. So this body is trying to understand how 2 trucks can actually be called environmental remediation. And if you can expound on that, of how you can see that, not knowing the large percentage of trucks they have, but how 2 trucks can define that our air is going to be cleaner.
Yeah, sure. So first, just want to clarify that it's one haul truck, just one. So it's a really large haul truck that's used on their facility properties. So it's not one that's going on the road. It's not hauling things back and forth, you know, to other facilities necessarily, and Katie, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that one. And because it's just such an old vehicle and the emission standards were a lot poorer back in 1965 or 64 when this truck was built, it will significantly reduce the emissions from that truck. Yes, you're absolutely right. It is not a 100%, you know, reduction in emissions from trucks. It's not, they're not going to electric vehicles or something like that, that might reduce that significantly, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. But yes, it's one haul truck. So Katie, I don't know if you can talk a little bit more about what that truck is used for, the old one, and then if the new one's going to be used for the same thing, that might be helpful too.
This might be a better question for Aaron. I don't know specifically, exactly what's gonna go in it and where it's going. Besides, yes, we're getting a newer truck and it's gonna have much better emission profile than an old one from 1965. Again, this is a voluntary action that was additional to the enforcement action that we're really here to address, which is about fallout and odors. And so the main part of the action was really focusing on what kind of additional controls the company was going to install and maintain to really cut down on those two issues.
Yeah, and I can add on to that a bit. So, yeah, this is a truck that I think is just hauling material around their facility. And so, yeah, like we've said, this is the supplemental environmental project. So this isn't something they were required to do. It's something that is kind of above and beyond. And like Katie said, it's not for addressing the odor and fallout violations, but so supplemental environmental projects are ways to direct that money back to the community. So if Levy had decided that they didn't want to do a supplemental environmental project, they would have just paid the fine to the state of Michigan general fund, and it would have been a lot lower number than they're actually paying. So whenever a company does one of these projects, they always end up paying more than the settlement amount, just because of the nature of our policy. So, you know, they do get a mitigation credit for the penalty, but, you know, there's still a portion that has to go to the state of Michigan general fund. And then, you know, they'll, I guess, draft up the project proposal and price everything out. And, you know, that is how much it's going to take to do the project correctly. So in this case, the cost of the haul truck, the new haul truck that they're buying is around $350,000. You know, it's a pretty expensive truck. So that's something that they didn't need to do. So it's, you know, I guess it is, you know, a benefit to the community, you know, in the big scheme of things. I'm not sure how that weighs out, but it will help reduce emissions. So actually in the consent order, there is the project proposal. I'm just trying to pull it up right now. And that does have a lot more description about the expected environmental benefits, you know, which old truck they have, which new truck they're purchasing, what I think it says, yeah, so the truck moves bulk materials between multiple locations in Plant 6. So that is the main job of the specific truck that they are replacing. So yeah, like I said, there's a lot more information there if you want to take a look at it. And you know, after you take a look at that, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to contact me, and I'd be happy to answer.
So just to clarify, the new truck stays within the plant boundaries.
Yes, you got it.
So in 60 years, it took Levy to move themselves to purchase a new truck And let's not forget that Levy is worldwide. They're not just Southwest based, but that they're a conglomerate. And that's, you know, we understand the decision, but really this is not absolutely fair to the community. And that we want accountability. This block club wants to be assured after this Zoom that we are part of conversations. We will lend you our email, but we definitely want updates on this company, on what they're doing. And then how they can be a better community partner with us and the larger community. Right here, we have a diversity of people. And we would ask for transparency on any type of community meetings that you could have all collateral and anything video and verbal be translated in second and third languages. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up. I greatly appreciate it. Question, if you don't mind asking, just because sometimes with translation, we're making a best guess, but we really appreciate community feedback on that. If there were specific languages that you would like to see for this community, we have done Spanish and Arabic in the past. But would there be any other languages that would be helpful?
Spanish and Arabic, right?
Yes,
Yeah, Madam Chair, that's sufficient for right now is Spanish and Arabic. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, thank you very much for clarifying that. It's greatly appreciated. Was there someone else that had questions? And I just want to watch our time. We are getting close to 7 and I'm fine with going a little bit over to respond to questions. I'm really happy that you guys are all there together. So, but I just wanted to give us a little bit of a time check.
Thank you. What
Yeah.
I would like to know is, will the new trucks be used for the green circle with green circle cement?
I do not believe so. That's a different project, I believe. So it's, Aaron, that was the one you were asking about. So Green Circle Cement, I think Aaron's gonna look into that, but that's not the same project as this one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Our next member is up now.
Okay.
Hello, ladies. My name is Ann Becker. I am a member of the community and a member of the Block Club here. I would like to know why EGLE did not contact us regarding this environment thing.
Yeah, so that's a great question. We have a variety of ways that we get information out to folks. I think that we had some, I'm trying to think of the easiest way to talk about this. So we have like a subscription service that's just like emails that keeps people updated. So you have to subscribe to it. We don't want to just give people, notes that they might not want. So we use that. We also have a calendar that we post all of our public meetings on. We have a web page. We did do some limited outreach to we call it an interested parties list. And it's basically just folks like you who we have interacted with in the past that have said, hey, we care about levies. So just like you guys are doing tonight, which is awesome. But I think we just didn't have, for whatever reason, you guys' contact information at the time that we were reaching out about this. So we did a lot of outreach to try to get as many people as we could. But I think we just weren't aware that there was a great way to get a hold of all of you. So now that we know, appreciated for sure. So apologies for not connecting in an earlier fashion. So, and I don't know if you mind talking to us about how you found out about the meeting tonight. That would be really helpful for us as well.
All right, I'll lead that to our president.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Yep, our president is coming to the computer.
Yeah, it's certainly, we try to get, like I said, notes out to everybody, but we appreciate folks letting us know when we've missed somebody, and now you guys will be on our list. So maybe you won't like that. Hopefully you will.
And we actually are on your list, and
Okay,
we've
wonderful.
signed up, and I have signed up for your newsletter, and I will share with the membership how they can get it directly.
Wonderful.
The Springdale Woodmere Block Club gets this information at my email, which we did enter already on the computer.
Perfect.
I'm gonna work a little bit harder with our younger technical people, because when we forward your emails, like the one that actually laid out the settlement, I had to do like a recap of that because the attachments don't forward correctly for us. So
Okay,
hopefully
that-
that's an internal problem and we can fix that.
No, I mean, that is great feedback because, you know, again, we try to do things a certain way because we think it's working. And when it's not working for people, we definitely want to hear about that because we want to be able to adjust. We send a lot of attachments and sometimes, and it's try to help people if they don't have the internet or a good connection. But if that ever happens again, feel free to reach back out to whoever was the sender of the emails. Like if it was Aaron or myself or whoever it was, you know, we're happy to work with you on that and get you what you need to be able to share it with your block club residents. So yeah, and apologies that happened. That had to be kind of frustrating, I'm sure.
Well, you know.
Sorry to divert.
No, that's okay. And actually, at our last meeting, we pulled up some Apple people and some Android people and even some flip phone people. And we did a tutorial on how to join Zooms. But ultimately, for a lot of people, Zooms don't work, at least in our community.
Okay, no, that's good feedback.
In-person meetings are better. I wanted to, for the interest of clarity, I worked for environmental firms for like a really long time, was a technical writer who then got trained and thrown into the field. And one of the places that I worked was at the old Fort Rouge before it became Cleveland Cliffs. And I did all of the air monitoring when the Coke ovens got cleaned, you know, the Class D air and all that lovely stuff. So I know what's in those trucks. I've looked at it under a microscope. So my question is, when these trucks are disassembled, and of course they're right next to the Rouge, which then leads right out to the Detroit River in 1.5 miles, what type of containment is going to be used when they are disassembled? And then I know if we go through you, we may have to do a FOIA, but we are your neighbors. We have communicated with Maxwell Rubin before via email, and we're very, Levy has our contact.
Okay.
So receipts and things like that could be just shared with us. We're your neighbors. And we'd like to see a receipt for the scrapped truck, number one, and we would like to see that those funds donated to one of the local environmental groups like Greening of Detroit or Southwest Detroit Environmental Visions. We think that would be a real nice add-on to the settlement, rather than it just going back into Levy's pocket. And how will it be transported? Because again, that's going to be some nasty stuff that gets cut up when that truck gets scrapped. And then the other thing is Southwest Detroit Environmental Vision, who works well with Levy, and they're working really well, and we're thrilled about reducing the carbon footprint at the Fort of Detroit. They also do a program to take old diesel engines out of service so that nobody's reusing them. And so since this truck is a little bit younger than me by 2 years, and I know how old I am, we would love, and Southwest Detroit Environmental Vision has already told us that they are more than willing to put the diesel engine from this truck when it goes out of commission and put it through their program and run a rod through it so nobody can reuse that heavy particulate spewing engine anymore. So those are things, basically this is where involving the community, EGLE, this one's for EGLE, in the settlement talks, these little addendums could have been added from the get-go.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing all that up. And I'm just going to mention, and I think you probably know this, some of that might be great for a comment when we get to the comment period, just to put it officially on the record. I mean, we're making note of some of the things that you said. Addressing just the truck when it gets scrapped. I don't think they're going to scrap it right there. but they do have to prove that they've scrapped it. They're not allowed to reuse it, including the engine. Any parts of it can't go back into like the stream of being reused. So your point about Southwest Detroit Environmental Vision is, that's a really good point, and definitely making note of that.
So
Was
we're
there
not,
any- Oh,
so
sorry,
we're
go
not,
ahead.
so we're not in the comment section?
No, this is just a question and answer. So that's why I'm saying,
All right, all
when we
right.
get to the comment section, though, remember how that works. We'll listen, but we won't be responding to any questions, which is fine. But I just I think that some of what you said, you might want to put in the comments. So just wanted to make sure that that was noted as well.
I think we
so-
have a couple more people.
A couple
and-
more? Okay, so it's about 6 after, so let's do 2 more from you guys, or 2 more folks, and then we'll get into that hearing portion, if that sounds good.
2 more. Go ahead. Oh, I took it. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Scott. I jumped on somebody's question. Anybody else going once? So we can still put stuff in comments the whole time.
Yep.
that we're doing this. So why don't you mute us and type some of our stuff into the comments? Okay.
Yeah, and we're happy to answer other questions too, outside of this meeting. We'll provide our contact information so you guys can get directly a hold of Aaron or directly a hold of Katie on that as well. The comment period is open until October 25th, so there's still 10 more days to pull things together if you want to ask some more questions. We just really wanted to make sure that this meeting gave information that you all might need, so.
Perfect. And thank you.
Yeah, it's no problem. Is there any other questions that you all have? Otherwise, we can shift over to the hearing portion.
I think we're going to shift to the hearing portion.
Okay.
Somebody else is going, and then we'll put any additional things into the comments.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And then before we shift over, so thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Katie, for helping out with the Q&A. So just for more information for you guys, because I think you might not have been on when I mentioned this before. So we did have another just informational meeting a couple of weeks ago. I know there's maybe internet issues and things like that, but we do have a recording of that meeting as well. That went into a lot more detail about the plans. Katie really talked about the fugitive dust control plan and the nuisance minimization plan for odors in a lot more detail. If it helps as like a supplement to kind of the paperwork and reading through it, we can share that with you guys as well, if folks might be interested in that. So, all right. Well, Katie and Aaron, thank you so much for question and answer. I'm going to have Chris turn his camera on, and we're going to shift over into the hearing portion of the night. All right, so before we get into that, while Chris kind of gets himself settled, I just want to talk a little bit about comments, especially since we were just talking about that with folks. So when we talk about public comments, if you haven't done it before, sometimes it can be a little bit daunting to stand up and say what you think. So first of all, you don't have to say anything tonight. We have some other ways that folks submit comments a lot. We have a voicemail box that if folks don't have the internet and don't have email, things like that, we're happy to take those calls into that voicemail box. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, but we also take email and just regular mail. That's also fine. But when it comes to public comments, really anybody is free to comment on anything that we're talking about tonight. So there's a lot of things that are involved in this. You heard Aaron talk about the consent order itself, which has those specific requirements, the penalties, the plans. There's a lot to this one. This one has, a lot of meat to it. So there's some comments that are more likely to lead to changes. So things that are focused on like the content and why the draft consent order is the way it is, that might be a little bit more challenging, but those are definitely things that are going to be more likely to lead to changes. Or if there's a specific change you think should be made, one of the things that you mentioned is about working with Southwest Detroit Environmental Vision on the engine. Like that would be a very specific comment that could possibly lead to a change. Comments that are not as likely to lead to changes are things that are going to be outside the scope of the order, things like outside of the plans or outside of the supplemental environmental project, things like that, we didn't talk about tonight, stuff like that. whether or not there is just widespread support or opposition to this action. It's completely fine to comment that. People do it all the time, and we love to get those kinds of comments, but they won't make a difference in whether or not the consent order is entered into with the company. So just kind of want to talk a little bit about that. Again, if you don't make a comment tonight, that's fine. Happy to talk about comments with folks as well. But we do consider all the comments. Chris will consider all the comments that you guys make. That's why he's here tonight, to listen in, before we make a final decision. And then once the final decision's made, we do share that decision with everyone. So we'll talk a little bit more about that after the official hearing portion of the night. So just to reiterate again, in this portion of the night, unlike what we were just doing, which was having some really nice dialogue, so much appreciated for all of you asking all the questions. We'll just be listening during this portion of the night. So if you want to make a comment tonight, that's wonderful. But if you ask a question in your comment, which that does happen, we won't be responding to that at this time, but we will respond to it later when we respond to the comments. So to get this started, I do have to read kind of an opening statement that can be a little bit dry, but I'm going to try to get through it as fast as I can so we can get to those comments. All right, so good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Jennifer Dixon with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy Air Quality Division. I will be serving as the hearing officer for this public hearing on the proposed administrative consent order for Edward C. Levy Company located in Wayne County, Michigan. Chris Etheridge, Assistant Division Director of EGLE's Air Quality Division, is the decision maker for this administrative consent order. The Air Quality Division is responsible for regulating sources of air pollutants to minimize adverse impacts on human health and the environment. The law governing these responsibilities is Part 55 of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to allow anyone interested in the proposed consent order to provide information the Air Quality Division can use in deciding whether to approve the consent order as written, or if there are additional issues to be considered. So please recognize that we can only use the information you provide if it relates to the criteria we must use in making a decision. Some of you, for example, concerns related to local zoning, truck traffic, and noise are not within our authority. Some of you may want to express your support or opposition to the proposed consent order. We will be happy to make note of your position, but please understand that we are by law not allowed to base our decision on whether there is widespread support or opposition to the enforcement action. Please note the proposed terms of this consent order are brought to you tonight as a draft agreement. This does not mean the decision has already been made. Instead, it reflects an initial agreement that includes requiring the company to follow a compliance plan, pay a monetary penalty, and to pay additional penalties if compliance is not maintained. Everything in the proposed consent order remains open for comment and further consideration by the division. This hearing is being recorded, and your comments will be part of the information EGLE will consider in making its decision on the proposed consent order. The public comment period for this consent order opened on September 9th and will close on October 25th, 2024. Additional information can be submitted until then, and it will be considered when we make our decision. After the public comment period closes, the decision maker will review all written and verbal comments received. All significant air quality related comments will be considered, at which point the decision maker will make a final decision on the consent order. The decision maker may reject the consent order, approve it as drafted, or approve it with amendments. If approved, the decision must specify which provisions, if any, have been changed in the final consent order and the reason for those changes. In all three of these scenarios, all interested parties, including everyone who was on the original mailing list, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended either informational session or the public hearing, will be directly notified of the decision. As stated previously, you may submit a comment at any time by mail or email. You may also type the word comment into the question box and submit your comment in writing tonight. If you do not want me to read your comment out loud, please state "do not read." If you would like to make a verbal comment, you may raise your hand and I'll unmute your line so you can speak. So those of you at the block club, if you want to do a similar thing as a question and answer and kind of line up, that will work perfectly. So we're going to limit comment time to about 3 minutes, and I'll do my best to give you a 30-minute warning when your 3 minutes is about up. And we'll try to call on people as their hands were raised, but I know that we have a little bit of challenges with that tonight. So please also recognize that our department staff are here tonight to provide a fair opportunity for you to express your views on the proposed consent order and listen to your comments. So thank you so much for your attention. I will now begin calling names of anyone who would like to indicate they would like to make a statement. All right, so I know we have a little bit of a challenge because we've got the block club. So if folks from the block club would like to make comments, anyone there, we can definitely unmute your line so that you can speak those comments aloud. We have some other folks online as well. If anyone would like to make a comment tonight, we're happy to do that. So I'll just give you a little bit of a chance to raise your hands there. Okay, I'm not seeing any raised hands, so I'm going to just unmute the block club just to make sure if there's any question or anyone who would like to make a comment there. I just want to make sure we're not just not seeing you guys' hands raised. Okay, there we go. Yep, you should be able to unmute yourself over there. The block club, just try it and let's see if we can hear you. Because it worked great earlier.
Hello?
Okay, there we go. Now I can hear you for sure. So just a reminder, if you guys are gonna have more than one person talking, if you can just introduce yourself and then any association that you have, you don't have to say the block club if you don't want to. I think we're good there, but just make sure that you introduce yourself before you start making your comment.
Yeah. I was wondering that we if possible, can I write it down? Some
Yeah.
of our members is leaving.
Yep, that's totally fine. Yeah, if you guys even want to take comments there in writing and collect them and send them in, I'll give you the address in just a minute to do that as well. Or email them or whatever works best.
Got it. Hold on for a second. Let me
Yep,
get a
no
pen
problem.
and pencil.
The big thing to note here, and some of the verbiage I got here is kind of technical, but what's most important is the study does.
We did have one comment that came in while those folks are getting ready, and this is from Paul Boyce. So Paul said, please address fugitive dust and odor as slag is loaded onto trucks, rail, ship, barge to transport away from site. So Paul, thank you for your comment on that.
Hello?
Yep, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Yep. Can you give me the address first?
Oh yeah, we'll get right there. Give me 1 second. Let me just make sure there's nobody else who wants to make a comment tonight and we'll get right there. I'm gonna put it on the screen in just a second here. It should be on the screen. I don't know if you can see it.
Got it.
So if you want to write that down while we're just waiting to make sure nobody wants to make a comment too. Thank you, Caitlin, for putting that in the chat as well. All right, well, Chris, I think I'm going to go ahead and close the comment or the hearing if you don't mind. Does that sound good to you? Sounds like we don't have anybody who wants to make a verbal comment tonight.
Yep, sounds
All
good.
right,
Oh,
perfect. So
there
I
is a
just-
hand that just went up.
Oh, all right, cool. All right, Paul, hold on 1 second. All right, Paul, you should be able to unmute yourself and then just make sure you introduce yourself before you start making your comment. And I see you're unmuted, but I can't hear you. So you try one more time. Nope, and we're still not hearing you. Hold on one second. Okay. I'm gonna just mute you and then ask you to unmute again. Let's just try it one more time here. All right, try it one more time. Let's see if we can hear you. Nope, I'm not hearing you. Caitlin, do you have any thoughts on Paul? It might be how you're connected to the computer audio, why we're not able to hear you. No, I'm really sorry. Apologies that we're not able to hear you tonight. There you go. Okay, thank you. Yep. Okay, so Paul's comment is, there's 2 sites where the slag is generated that they appear to be in Dearborn. So the aerial photos showed a conveyor across the river. So please address any dust or odor that is happening via the conveyor. So yeah, thank you for your comment on that one as well. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close the hearing, and then we'll get to a couple other pieces of information that might be helpful for folks. So again, thank you so much for your comments and cooperation tonight. We really do appreciate your interest in the proposed consent order, as well as the time you took to be here tonight. So as indicated at the beginning of the hearing, the public comment period ends on October 25th, 2024. All interested parties, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended this public hearing will be directly notified of the final decision on the proposed consent order. So the hearing is now closed. Thank you again. Just so folks know, the addresses that are on the screen right now, email, snail mail, regular mail, voicemail, you can use any of these mechanisms to submit comments by October 25th. I know Caitlin has shared a lot of stuff in the chat, so hopefully folks at the Block Club, if you need help getting that information or downloading it, or you can't find it, or you lose the links, you know, whatever the case may be, definitely reach out to any of us. You can reach out to Erin as well. Her email is on the screen right there. All of this information that we talked about related to the proposed consent order is online at michigan.gov/EGLE air public notice. So if you want a kind of a quick link, you can grab that stuff there as well. So what are you going to find there? Again, the proposed enforcement summary, which is kind of a high level overview of the consent order and what is contained in it. The enforcement summary report, which I know that's kind of seems the same, but that just dives a little bit deeper into what the violations were and things like that. And then that draft consent order that we talked about tonight. So what happens next? We will wait any comments that folks have until October 25th. Once the comment period closes, we will write a response to comments document that will respond to all the comments that we receive from the public. And we'll give that to Chris. Chris will review all of those comments. He will decide what the direction this proposed consent order is going to go. And then we'll finalize the consent order in some way, shape, or form. And then we will let folks know how that all ended up. We also will provide a follow-up email to this meeting tonight. We'll try to get that out a little bit later this week. That will have links to the recordings, not this one probably, just to let folks know, but the one that happened previously, links to more information. And again, if you get that in a way that it's not easy to forward on to other people that might want it, please let us know. We're happy to get you that information in whatever way you need. So who to contact? This is just Erin and Katie's contact information. If there is a pollution emergency or you're experiencing odors or fallout like we talked about tonight, you can also feel free to call the pollution emergency number, which is 800-292-4706. So with that, just want to thank everybody for your time, attention, patience tonight as we tried to work through some of those things. In the future, if there are going to be other hearings that are going to be in this area, we're happy to reach out to the Block Club and let you guys know. So thanks so much for providing your contact information. Any other questions that you might have, please feel free to reach out to us, but thanks again, much appreciated. And Caitlin, whenever you're ready, if you want to go ahead and end the meeting, I would appreciate it. So thanks, everybody.